Since 1973, 186 death sentences have been imposed on female offenders, representing roughly 2% of all death sentences. South Carolina's capital punishment system historically applies to women, but this is statistically rare, with women representing about 2% of death sentences imposed since 1973. Recent legislative proposals, such as the Prenatal Equal Protection Act, aim to classify abortion as homicide and could subject women who have abortions to the death penalty, although these proposals face legal and constitutional challenges. Historically, the state has executed a small number of women, with one documented case in 1943. On July 31, 2024, the Supreme Court of South Carolina ruled that the death penalty was legal, including the execution methods of electrocution and firing squad, both approved by a majority of the judges, paving the way for the potential resumption of executions. As of August 2025, a total of 25 inmates remain on death row in South Carolina. 13 years after the last execution, these resumed, with the state carrying out the death sentence of convicted killer Freddie Eugene Owens on September 20, 2024. South Carolina's capital punishment system is currently active, with the electric chair as the primary execution method, though the firing squad is also an option. After a 13-year pause in executions due to a shortage of lethal injection drugs, South Carolina has resumed executions as of late 2024, with death row inmates now able to choose between the firing squad or electric chair. As of August 2025, 25 inmates are on death row. Between 2011 and 2024, no one has been executed in the state due to pharmaceutical companies refusing to sell the drugs needed for lethal injections. Lethal injection has been the legalized primary form of execution since 1995, while the passage of Act 43 of 2021 allowed resumption of executions by electric chair as the primary form of execution. Late March 2022, the South Carolina Department of Corrections announced they were ready to carry out executions by firing squad. Inmates currently have the choice to be executed via electrocution or firing squad, with electrocution being the primary method. Historical data on executions in South Carolina reflects the state's centuries-long discriminatory application of the death penalty against African Americans. Black men, women, and children comprised 78.5% of the people executed in South Carolina in the 20th century. 3/4 of those executed for murder in the 20th century were people of color, and 74.5% were black. South Carolina is one of 38 states that authorize the death penalty. Murder is the only state crime for which one may be executed. Because of the severity of the penalty, special procedures exist for death penalty trials. For example, death penalty trials are bifurcated, a term that means a trial is divided into two parts. The first segment is the guilt or innocence phase, in which a prosecutor must prove to a jury, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the offender did in fact commit the murder and acted with extreme disregard for human life. If the jury returns a verdict of guilty, the trial then moves to the penalty phase. Here the prosecutor must show that aggravating circumstances exist that would warrant the most extreme punishment. If the prosecutor can demonstrate that one of these factors was present during the commission of the crime, the jury may opt, but is not required, to impose a sentence of death. Much as in the guilt phase, the defense will use the penalty phase to introduce mitigating circumstances that demonstrate that the crime in question does not satisfy the requirements for death. Prior to 1912, executions were carried out by individual counties. The method of choice at that time was hanging. On August 6, 1912, the state began executions by electrocution. The original death row and death house were located at the Central Correctional Institution in Columbia. The last execution to take place at the CCI site was in 1986. In 1988, the state established a new capital punishment facility located at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia. The first execution occurred there in 1990. Death row was also moved temporarily from CCI to BRCI by 1997. Death row for men was permanently located at Lieber Correctional Institution in Ridgeville. For women it was located at the Camille Griffin Graham Correctional Institution in Columbia. The rationale for not having death row located in the same facility as the death house is that it allows the correctional staff who deal with the inmates on a daily basis on death row to avoid any responsibility in carrying out the death warrant. From 1912 to 1995, the method of execution was death by electrocution. However, in 1995 the state legislature adopted a second method, that of lethal injection. Inmates under a death sentence are allowed to choose the method by which the sentence is carried out. If an inmate does not select a method and was sentenced prior to 1995, then he or she will be executed by electrocution. If the inmate does not select a method and was sentenced after 1995, the default choice is lethal injection. One of the women executed in South Carolina was Marie Stinette. Marie was a 49-year-old black woman and a root doctor. Marie Stinette, number 276, was executed the 17th of January 1947 for murder. Marie Stinette, a root doctor, killed her husband. The 49-year-old woman was sent to die in the electric chair in South Carolina. As she was electrocuted on January 17, 1947, a fuse blew, leaving the room in darkness. Witnesses saw sparks from the woman's head and arms dimly illuminate the death scene, before somebody struck a match to provide more light. South Carolina's only other female execution was that of Rose Marie Stinette, which took place at the Central Correctional Institution in Columbia in the same electric chair that had been used for Sue Logue's execution. Rosa was a 49-year-old root doctor or herbalist from Williamsburg County who conspired with 3 men to murder her husband, on whose life she had no less than 8 insurance policies. His mutilated body was found on a railroad track. At trial, 2 of the men, one her boyfriend, got life sentences for their part in the killing, while Rosa and the other man got the death penalty. He was reprieved by Governor Williams and Rosa went to the chair alone. As the switch was thrown, the resultant electrical surge blew the light fuse and the witnesses, now in virtual darkness, observed sparks coming from Rose's head and arms. Her daughter, Katie Grant, could not afford a funeral for her mother, so she was buried within the penitentiary cemetery. Thank you for watching Death Row.